Hi, everybody. We are the editors of With Great Power Comes Great Pedagogy, Teaching, Learning, and Comics. And we've spent a bunch of time working on this book together, and we just wanted to talk a little bit about what comics pedagogy might mean. And so I'm joined by my co-editors, Susan Kirtley and Peter Carlson. My name is Antero Garcia. We're hoping to basically just talk a little bit about, amongst ourselves, you get to listen to our private conversation, about what comics pedagogy means right now. And so maybe I can start with you, Susan, and ask you, could you talk about the kinds of disciplinary perspectives you're bringing to this volume? Who are you? What comics have shaped your thinking or your teaching? Just a little bit about like how you're coming into this work as an editor.
Sure. I'm Susan Kirtley. I teach at Portland State, and my training is really in rhetoric. So I'm a rhetorician, so I come at it from that angle, and I'm really interested in how we make an argument through text and image. So that is really interesting to me. As a teacher and a professor, I'm really interested in thinking about the ways that we can use comics as a way of thinking through ideas as well, because I teach a lot of writing classes, and I'm always talking about writing as a process and a way of communicating, but also as a way of thinking through ideas. So that's an area I'm really interested in that we also we address in the book is, how do we use comics to think through ideas? And then I suppose I've talked about my disciplinary training and my teaching, but I think as a fan, I just love reading comics and I love talking about comics. So this has been a real joy to work on this project because I just get to read comics and talk about comics with interesting people. So, this project has been a lot of fun for me to work on.
Yeah, not bad for a day job, right? It's
Right? Yeah.
pretty good. Peter, who are you?
I am Peter Carlson, indeed, and I'm currently a literacy curriculum specialist. That means I work with a public charter school district in Los Angeles, and predominantly through the year, I'm just working with English teachers as they develop both their curriculum and then bring to life their own teaching vision. So working with them from anything from management to lesson planning to data analysis. It does afford me some time as well to draft curriculum and share that with teachers when it seems that their vision has something that could fit and help them with some pre-provided curriculum. Prior to this position, I was in the classroom about 10 years teaching a variety of English language and English language arts courses at 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th at Los Angeles Unified School District first before joining the Green Dot Public School District. I'm in always just within South Central Los Angeles is where I've been kind of housed. And a comics pedagogy for me began with just bringing my old collection of comic books into the classroom just to beef up the library. The year I started teaching, our school library was closed. So it was really dependent upon teachers to bring books in. And that was very interesting because just watching how students took to those stories, having those on hand and just kind of the culture of literacy that came up from it, students talking about stories, talking about how stories were told, gave me an entranceway to bring in some kind of critical questioning into their groups and then into the classroom. And as it kind of spiraled out from there, I just felt emboldened to use both comics as content, as text to bring before students, for them to analyze and consider both with the lens of just literary analysis, but then also how it speaks to their world, how things ring true to them, how things might be omitted in those stories from their own world. But then more so, I grew, and really the past 5 years have been more to how can comics as something that you construct be a means for your own communication, both within the classrooms that I'm coaching now, offering students a differentiated objective, a way for them to show their own learning in ways that might not be the traditional modality, but it really accesses a kind of learning and understanding that they're much more comfortable with and fluent with, and then allowing them to really take it from there.
Awesome. Oh, my name is Antero Garcia. I'm an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. But before that, well, a couple of steps before that, I had the pleasure of getting to teach with Peter in the high school in Los Angeles, and including that same year when our librarian, we did not have a library for the academic year. And so I also got to really think about the power of comics as a way to shape young people's identities. And that's a lot of what I do now, is thinking about what does teaching and learning mean when we think about multimodality in classrooms. How does this shape voice? How does fandom come into classrooms? And so that's really the kind of interest that I've been thinking about with all of this. So I want to name that, thinking about the three of us, right? So Susan coming in from like an English department perspective, Peter as a current district support person in a school district, and I tend to deal with teacher education programs and folks who are thinking about systems of learning, right? This is part of the interdisciplinary approach that we intentionally tried to bring to a book within comic studies and intentionally around comics pedagogy. I want to shift our conversation really briefly to thinking about the present without droning on too long. We are, as we're recording this now, in a time of social distancing and distance learning. And as we're trying to recenter what comics pedagogy might mean in the time of a global pandemic, we recognize the kind of weight and heaviness of what's happening in the world right now. But we also wonder, what are the possibilities of teaching and learning with comics right now? Are there bright spots? Are there ways that this is connected to the ways that we can make meaningful connections with young people? And kind of blathering around this, Susan, I'm wondering if you have thoughts around what does comics pedagogy mean right now for us?
In this really unsettling time, I've actually found all of these amazing comics about the pandemic, and it reminds me of the power of educational comics, which have a long history and tradition. And I've really turned to them for, in light of a lot of misinformation. There's some really great comics to help, I would say children, but help all of us learn about the pandemic, what to do, and healthcare and things like that. So I've really been, the power of educational comics has been, I think, a really very much a present bright spot in this moment. And the other thing I've been thinking about in terms of comics pedagogy is how the comics community, and by comics community I mean the creators, the writers, the artists, also the fans, the teachers, have really come together in an amazing way. So you have, the writers and the artists, coming up with these great exercises, activities that families can do, and supporting parents who are doing more things at home, and getting information to the students. And so you see these communities of the writers, the artists, the teachers are using comics, and I think it's, the kids have an outlet both for getting information and working through their ideas. So it's really underscored for me the value of educational comics as well as the power of the comics community. And I think that's something we are really stressing in the book. And I think I've really seen the comics community coming together. And I think that for me is very exciting to think about how we can support one another in times like this. And I've really seen people doing a great job of bringing the comics community together to support one another, both the comic shops, the writers, the artists, and kids. So that's been exciting for me.
I love those, the connections across all of these different spaces, right? It's not just this direct instruction of here's a book, read it, right? But like the broad, network community there is really beautiful. Peter, what are you thinking about in terms of how these relate to what you're seeing in schools right now?
Well, wholesale in this current predicament of it pushed our schools specifically to finally start rushing toward the 21st century, as opposed to birthday party next door, drive-by, social distance partying. See, you gotta, the way humans can kind of adapt and grow, it's like, it's ever present. So, and that's really what we've been forced to do, is like you know, it's 2020. And so this idea of every student having a one-to-one access to some sort of like either a computer or a tablet isn't like a novel, like, well, maybe we'll kind of get to it. It's as essential as, you know, several decades ago, well, you can't have some kids with books and some not. And so that brought to our district to the forefront. We need to make this happen. So I mean, we did the purchasing first, and then the you know, the fundraising afterwards to try to figure out to recoup costs, but to make sure that all our students had computers and Wi-Fi, because a lot of our homes didn't even have that as well. But then when it comes to after you have that, once you have the digital access, what are you going to do? And so my work immediately when schools were closed down was trying to curate some curriculum guides that teachers can implement, where they can follow along with some of the similar content, meaning like the essential questions and the text they were going to investigate, and same kind of guiding questions along the way. But if you're not there in person to interact with your student, how are your students guided in that engagement and guided in their own investigation? So for instance, one of the units I was drafting was, they no longer were going to be able to read Romeo and Juliet together as a class. But they still needed, what it helped a lot of teachers see is, if the students needed just the content, how can we get the content to them? And so in this instance, it was just understand the story and then start examining some of Shakespeare's writing and then go on to other texts that are referring to it. And so I brought in a lot of, there was like a video of a comic, then there's like graphic novel adaptations accessed online. And there was a quick summary as told by texts, and each text was pretty much just a single panel comic. And then in summary writing, you know, having them do similar things that like Ivan Brunetti guided through in his book, of like thinking of a story that you like, paraphrasing it, putting it into 4 panels down to 1 panel, allowing students to process content in a way that breaks them from what they think their kind of prescribed notion of education. Like if they're not in a desk, then maybe they're not chained to the idea that, oh, I have to come up with the sentence that my teacher's expecting, but I can actually just convey my thought in any manner that I can. And so using building comics in the curriculum as a means for students to kind of show their understanding it just opened up that possibility that I hope, you know, when schools are open and we go back, a lot of these things can carry over. And then similarly, there's a lot of building comic support websites that are free and available to educators and students that can help. And it helps cut down on the time of the artistry, which if it's an English class, you're not really evaluating the artistry, you're evaluating the thought. And so they can use the medium, not worry about how strong their art is, but kind of get their ideas out there.
I love that. So I think for sake of time, this will be, so I think hopefully what we're envisioning is this is the beginning of a conversation amongst us, but also amongst all of you and the contributors of our book. I will give a quick shout out. So we spent a bunch of time working on this book, and we have some amazing people in it. I think I'm personally really honored that we've gotten to learn from. The publisher is particularly thinking about how difficult, resources and connections are. University of Press of Mississippi has essentially put more than half of this book online as an excerpt so that people can read and dig into. And I'll put the link wherever you're watching this. There's probably a link nearby for that excerpt so you can see it. I think our plan is this is the beginning of a conversation amongst us and with all of you. And so if you have thoughts around comics, please reach out. We're hoping to really continue this with all of you. So thank you for listening to us for a little bit. Bye.